Welcome back. Today we are going into chapter 4 of class 6, that is what books and burials tell us. Okay. Now think about this. Thousands of years ago, when people didn't have books like we do today, how did they share knowledge? They told stories, they sang songs, and they recited hymns. And from that time, we have some of the oldest books in the world. That is the Vedas, and there are 4 Vedas. That is Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharva Veda. Out of these, the oldest one is Rig Veda, and it's really old, composed about 3500 years ago. And Rig Veda has more than 1000 hymns, and they are called Shuktas, and which literally means well said. Okay, these hymns are like beautiful poems written in praise of different gods and goddesses. But here's something interesting: you couldn't just pick up a book and read the Rig Veda at that time. Why? Because it was not written down. People recited it, listened to it, and remembered it. Imagine that knowledge was passed from one generation to another just by speaking and listening. Only many centuries later, these hymns were finally written down. Now, let's see how do historians actually study the Rig Veda. Now, it's kind of like how archaeologists dig and find objects to know about the past. But here, in addition to broken pots or tools, we also have words like the hymns of the Rig Veda. These hymns are like little windows into that world. Some hymns are even written like dialogues. That is, you can see here. Imagine, and this conversation between sage Vishwamitra and 2 rivers, and the rivers are speaking and sage is replying, almost like a play. So, but that particular story is not very important for us. So let's move on. Now let's talk about the cattle, horses, and chariots. And back then, people actually fought battles for water, for capturing cattle, or even people. Back then, people actually fought battles for water, for capturing cattle, or even people. Not for kingdoms or land like we usually imagine kings fighting for later on. So no palaces, no forts, and just water, cattle, and sometimes really small matters compared to what came later. So, and there were also sacrifices and yajnas, and also people would offer things into the fire like ghee, grain, sometimes even animals. So believing that these offerings reached the gods, and this was an important practice in those times. So now let's look at the words used to describe the people. And there are basically 2 main groups, that the priests, which is called as Brahmins, and who perform rituals, and the Rajas. But wait, don't imagine the Rajas of big kingdoms yet. These early Rajas were very different. They had no capital cities, no grand palaces, and no armies, and they did not collect taxes either. Their sons did not automatically become Raja after them. So leadership was quite simple compared to later times. For the whole community, 2 special words were used, that is Jana and Vish, and the people who composed these hymns called themselves as Aryas, and one other side they called their opponents as Dasas or Dasis. These were people who did not perform sacrifices. Over a time, the word Dasa came to mean slave. That's how even the idea of slavery started coming into light in those early times. Now, we talk about the story of megaliths, okay? Now, what do you mean by megaliths? It's simple. Mega means big and lith means stone. So megalith is a big stone usually placed at the burial site. These megaliths began about 3000 years ago and were spread across many regions, that is Deccan, South India, Southeast, and even Kashmir. And if you see the image here, this is how they look, okay? Sometimes archaeologists find a circle of stone boulders and sometimes a single big stone standing upright on the ground. These are all different types of megaliths. But no matter the type, all these burials have some common feature. That is, generally the dead were buried with certain pots, usually called black and red ware. Imagine that even in the death, people placed things with the body, which tells us about their life and beliefs. Now, let's come to this something very interesting, that is social differences. Means, how do we know if people were rich or poor, or powerful or ordinary in back time? Well, archaeologists look at the objects found in the burials. For example, in one burial, they found a skeleton with 33 gold beds and 2 stone beds and 4 copper bangles. That clearly shows that person was rich or important. But in the other burials, they found very simple objects. So this gives us the clue about social inequality in those times also. And here's something else. You also find burials with more than 1 skeleton. Why? Because these were family burial sites. People who died later were also buried in the same grave, and there was even a kind of portal, and through which they placed the new body into the same burial site. So megaliths are like silent stone sentinels, quietly guarding the stories of people who lived thousands of years ago. Now, let's talk about a very special site, that is a special burial at Inamgan. Inamgan is an important archaeological site located on the Goda River. Now, let's talk about a very special site, that is special burial at Inamgan. Inamgan is an important archaeological site located on the God River, a tributary of Bhima River in the Maharashtra. And this site was occupied roughly between 3600 and 700 BCE. And what makes Inamgan special is the way people buried their dead. Unlike other places where burials were outside settlements, here the burials were found within the houses. Imagine that people were laying their family members to rest inside their own homes. That tells us something very unique about their relationship with the dead, and almost like keeping ancestors close to the living. One of the most famous discovery here, the burials of male person in the large four-legged clay jar and placed right in the courtyard of the house. And archaeologists found the skeleton laid straight with the care, showing the importance given to the rituals even in ordinary families. Now, let's see the occupation at Inamgan. Archaeologists have found clear evidence that people here practiced agriculture as well animal rearing. They found charred seeds of wheat and barley, and which shows us the what crops were grown. And they also found remains of animals such as cattle, buffalo, sheep, goats, and some evidence also points to presence of horse bones, and which is important because it helps us connect the spread of Indo-Aryan culture. Not just this, there is also evidence of fruits like bear, amla, and dates, and this tells us people had a mixed diets, not only grains but also fruits. So Inamgan gives us the complete picture of Chalcolithic village, how they lived, what they ate, and how they treated their dead, and how agriculture and animal husbandry formed the base of. So today we learned about the Rigveda, the megaliths and sites of Inamgan, and how people lived and what they believed and how society was shaping in those times. So that's all for this chapter. If you found it useful, do like, share, and subscribe for much more lectures, and thank you. See you in the next class.